Да, хотел бы всех приветствовать. Добрый день, меня зовут Данил Козлов, управляющий партнер GVA. Рад приветствовать вас из своего нового офиса. Как вы видите, это совсем не похоже на офис, но такие офисы теперь у нас у всех. Добро пожаловать в новую реальность. Вот. Для кого-то она тяжелая, для кого-то она интересная. Для нас она сильно воодушевляющая, потому что мы видим много изменений, и в этих изменениях точно будем каким-то образом участвовать или уже участвуем. Вот с Марвином много обсуждали то, что сейчас происходит, и решили такую сделать сессию для вас, коллеги, где и на основе там вопросов каких-то, которые вы задавали, вопросов, вы хотите, на которые вы хотите найти ответы, мы побеседуем с ним, и Наташа меня поправит, потом, может быть, откроем вообще поле для таких открытых вопросов, которые вы нам можете писать. Вот. Okay, now switching to English, Marvin. Thank you for joining us from sunny California. I hope it's at least sunny, even though you can only see the sun through your window. Can you actually physically go outside?
Yeah, it's nice. So we can go outside. Just have to stay away from people.
Okay, so yeah, it's pretty much the same thing here. We can go outside and it's finally spring, but we have to stay away from people. Now that we have to stay away from people, this whole thing, this transformation of everything in our lives is amazing. So we wanted to bring you in, and I really want to thank you for dedicating the next hour to kind of discuss with us a few questions that's on everybody's mind. Some of them are going to be, I guess, more generic, but people still want the answers, so we couldn't ignore those, and they came from many people. And some are more specific and more interesting. So we'll have a chat, discuss what's happening on this side of the ocean and that side, and maybe try and give some advice in terms of what to do to the people that are listening to us at the moment, so we can help them out in the situation. Because frankly, for me, this thing and what we're doing here is really about trying to see how we can do maximum to help. For those companies that can maintain their current business, and for those that can't, transform, because there's a lot of need for transformation, and some businesses can't avoid it. It's basically transform or die. So I'd like to kick off with basically more of a generic question. What's your general feel on the whole situation? In the Valley and globally. How radical this is, and how radical is the transformation that's coming onto us. And I'm even talking more specifically, not just for the people and the human race, but specifically for maybe the companies that want to, the big companies and the startups that are working with them.
Yeah. I mean, this is, as we talked about before, right? I think that this is pretty much like an unprecedented sort of like change, right? And crisis, because like this is actually the first time that this is a mass global economic recession that is not necessarily driven by a lot, like, even though there's some underlying economic issues, but it's been driven by a health crisis, which is very unusual. So even, I was here, I was in Asia in like 97, 98. I was in San Francisco in 2000, 2001, 2008, 2009, and 2010 to some extent, right? Like these were crises, but like even during those times, like people still going out and eating, people still going out, like people are still traveling. Like we've seen major industries that were doing fine, right? Like travel industry was doing incredibly well. Like that's gone, right? So you're starting to see some very sort of significant shifts. Like the SMB market is gone, right? Like the retail market, with the exception of some like Amazon, some of the online players, like that's like almost everybody else is gone. So there's significant changes, and I also think when you think about this from a corporate like company perspective, like a lot of them have all shut down, right? So they pushed out like all their staff is like, this is the first time they've actually had to work to sort of like manage their teams and manage their business. For many companies, like doing it distributed and doing it also at the same time as their kids are actually kicked out of school, right? Are at home too. This is a massive disruption to sort of like everybody's lives and business, right? And so if you look at the economic sort of like situation, like we're at standstill, like there's no economic activity or very minimal economic activity like globally.
So I mean, looking at this, obviously that there's a few strategies, and it depends obviously what company you are, but we're already seeing the reaction from many companies that we've seen in the previous crises, which are you're saying are not so severe, haven't been so severe, which is basically pull in the tentacles, wait it out, cut back on costs as much as we can, and then slowly come back around and restart the business and keep going pretty much the way they were going, and maybe in the process patch some holes, add a few new ways to work online to maintain at least a portion of the business. Now, you think that's the way to go, or there's other ways to go, or I mean, we should basically look at transformation, total transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like it really, really is dependent on sort of like the space that you're in, right? So, for example, if you are anything related to travel sector, you probably should do that, right? Like, I think like because like, it's for them, it's really more of a survival situation versus when you look at other companies like like what I see like Salesforce or other sort of like significant companies are actually sitting on a lot of cash. It actually is a very, very good opportunity to go sort of like really sort of like the typical strategy, like whether in good times or bad, is build, buy, or partner, right? But especially now, like it's an incredible time to sort of pick up like tech talent. It's an incredible time to pick up sort of like companies on the cheap, right? Like sort of like that companies that hopefully that used to be maybe worth like 100 million, 200 million are worth probably half of that now, right? And probably would be very, very happy to take that offer. Or companies that used to not be very, very open to sort of like sort of doing business or taking sort of like customers, like them treating you as a customer, like I think could be very different now. Like you see desperation sets in, right? So there's a lot more reality sort of set into to sort of like the startup ecosystem where there was almost too much money. That's changed now. And so I do think like never let a crisis sort of like go to waste. Like if you are sitting on a lot of capital, this is an incredible time to actually really, really transform your business and actually go on the sort of like the offense. Like even just marketing, right? Or picking up talent, which was very, very hard to do before, I think is a very different story now because everyone's cutting back on their marketing. Everybody's cutting back on spending. I think it's a very different story when if you have the resources to be able to go effectively change, like incorporate a lot more technology. I'm very, very bullish on cloud technology overall because I think you've seen that just like all of a sudden companies that used to be sort of centralized and concentrated are now by nature, because of the crisis, being forced to sort of decentralize and have everyone work from home, that is driving massive usage of cloud technology, right? Like basic cloud technology, just rethinking infrastructure from sort of like the beginning. That is a very unique opportunity, not just from a cost structure, but even from a scaling perspective in the long run.
But so there are opportunities to go and bullishly invest and put resources into technologies, and one of them is cloud. Now, do you think there are pockets of cloud technologies that haven't already been picked up? I mean, we're not the only smart guys in the room here, right? There's probably Google's and Microsoft's going around gobbling up every cloud service that's out there, or you think there's much more than they can pick up at the moment?
I think there's so like the last 10 years have been this incredible bloom of innovation, right, in almost every single area. And I think like the reality is every category is very crowded. So there's lots of interesting teams and technology out there. So the reality is that I don't think it's possible for an Amazon or for a Google to pick up every single great tech or team out there.
Mm. You said the word team, which brings to mind the morning conversation I had with a very big precious metal production company in Russia. And they were talking about, I was talking to their innovation team, and they were talking about how they had a lot of problems scouting for or trying to pick up people that had both entrepreneurial and corporate mindset at the same time. So they had both experiences, or at least were more mature entrepreneurs, because usually entrepreneurs want to basically do their own business. They don't want to go into even innovation teams within corporations. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, have you checked how many of these people have fallen off the market in the last 2 weeks? And how many will fall off in the next 3 weeks?
Yeah.
It's going to be a great space for you. Go and basically spread your nets. You're sitting on cash. So that's basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah. I mean, now's the time to go. If you have cash, now's a great time to go on the offensive, right? So I was talking to a bunch of my companies recently, and it's going to be a very challenging environment for fundraising. So if a lot of them are being, okay, now we need, and a lot of their customers have dropped out. So they're just being their net is much wider, right? In regards to sort of anyone's willing to give them money, they're going to work with them. And I also think from a talent pool perspective, a lot of startups are shedding, like one of the very well-funded company called Trip Actions, right? Like I'm a big fan of them. Like they just fired like 300 people, right? Like a lot of these very successful companies now, because they have to, like their business is just imploded.
Mm-hmm. So, do you see a lot of that already happening in the Valley? I mean, Valley seems to be flooded with cash, so I would imagine even startups had some reserves, no?
Yeah, some of them did, right? But at the same time, like now where you held reserves to sort of like for like now 18 months, the advice that we're giving a lot of startups is that you need to go to like 24, in some cases 36 months, because last recession, it took 2 years to come back to it. This one's way worse than it has been, than what we've seen. So you need what's happening is you have to extend your run rate.
Okay, so sorry, family member interruption. That's what happens when you're on Skype.
Yeah, it happens.
And they just they don't seem to care that much. It's anyway. So okay, but 36 months. Let me stop you there.
24
3 years.
Yeah.
You're saying we're in 3 years of what problems after this? Because I haven't heard anyone say that number yet. I've heard people say till the end of the year, maybe for a year, but really 36 months.
It's 24 to 36. 24 to 36 is a number I'm hearing from a lot of investor friends, because we're like I said, the last recession, which is the only data point we can actually like look at. It took like about 2 years to sort of get back to sort of like some level of normality. 2001 took maybe like 3 or 4. And so you're not being prudent if you don't have at least 24 months of cash.
Okay, so 24 months of cash. Let's say I'm a big company. I do have 24 months of cash. Right?
Yeah, I mean, big companies are different. I'm talking about for startups, right?
For startups.
Very, very different.
So 24 months of cash I do have. If I was a big company, even maybe I have 5 years of cash. What would I do with it? Where would I go? Which sectors besides cloud, which we kind of discussed, would you think I should exploit now? And obviously it depends on the industry, but let's talk about 3 industries which seem to be very relevant. Well, key to Russia in particular. So there's retail / FMCG. There's kind of industrial production, whether it be metals or chemicals. I'm not going to go into oil because that's a whole separate business of its own. And let's say there's telecom, because there's a few very big telecom companies in Russia that are probably sitting on some cash, I hope, by now. And what would you suggest to kind of different sectors? What should they be thinking about now?
Yeah, so I think on the retail / CPG, slightly different, right? But I think that if they have not been aggressive in sort of like digital sort of like distribution, right? Like now's the actual opportunity, because even e-commerce in the US is still very early days, right? Like I think it's maybe 25% of of commerce is actually online. So a lot of stuff is still offline. And I think we've seen, I think anyone who's not accelerating sort of like figuring out the digital distribution is really, 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 really behind, right? Especially now where it's like you have to have it, right? Like, you think about a lot of these like food delivery companies, like were kind of challenged before, like they've seen a new lease on life, right? And so if you're not thinking about some level of like last minute delivery, managing sort of like even distribution, like digital distribution channels, and not at least accelerating that piece, I think it's a shame, right? Like this is the time to go and figure that out.
Okay, and let me be a bit of a devil's advocate there, because on one hand, I do agree with you, and I see the same opportunities. And I also hear, Amazon, I'm sure is hiring 100,000 people now.
Yeah, 100,000 people.
Yeah, and we had a Russian, fairly big retailer hiring 500, which I guess also reflects that they're quite aggressively expanding. But what I'm hearing also is that people say, okay, this is the lockdown, the quarantine, it's gonna pass, and hopefully it will pass within not 36 months, but 2 months or a month, and we'll see. Now it's a month for all of us.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, what do I do? I mean, I'm a retailer. I've set up digital. People will go back to the old ways. Now, do you believe in that? That people will like really flip back to the old ways, or you think we will generate enough stickiness of this new interaction formats, this new buyer, behavior types that people there's a good chance that they will remain in the modus operandi that hey, I can buy online. I don't need to go to the store anymore.
I think that there's going to be a level of stickiness that, like it takes about 21 days to sort of like put, sort of like get sort of like habits, right? If you think about sort of like consumer behavior and human behavior, it takes typically about 21 days to sort of lock in a type of behavior. I think that number one, I think these lockdowns are going to take way longer. I think they're going to go, unfortunately, I think they're going to go through the summer, right? Like just like looking at the facts, right? I'm very, very pragmatic and I look at the data and I go, the likelihood of us actually getting a sort of like a vaccine is going to be at least a year, right? At least a mass-produced vaccine. Until that happens, and you're going to see this sort of like on and off. Like even a lot of the Asian countries are still starting to, a lot of the Asian countries are actually now going back to lockdown again, right? Or at least shutting down traffic from like outside coming in. So you're starting to see sort of like things coming back again. And so I unfortunately think that we're going to be in lockdown for way longer than we think. And that is going to change when stuff like that happens. That is going to change dramatic behavior.
Okay, so that's interesting. So let's go back to the big industrials. Now these guys, it's a very interesting time for them because, I mean, they don't have this. They can't pivot online as much, right?
Yeah. It's the business model is a little bit different, but there are, I think that if you look at almost every single aspect of like their supply chain and value chain, like there are things that you can actually, there are initiatives that you can actually push through because cost savings is going to become very, very important. What's the best way of cost savings, right? The best way of cost savings is actually digitalization of what used to be manual processes. Now it's actually time to push very, very hard. It's not just cloud services, but like what are the things that they can actually do to sort of bring software to sort of like replace a lot of manual processes. It's a great time for sort of like that term re-engineering.
So also decreasing risk by automation, so you have less people interacting with each other, less contagion possibility, and that way you basically decrease the risk for all of your workers. And that might be, although we know how long that takes to implement these solutions in the industrial environments.
Yeah, but I think that there's going to be like, I also think what's going to happen is there will be if a lot more people die, there will be a lot of regulatory things being driven, that will be driving this, right? So it's coming.
So you think there's also regulation that would be, did you hear anything about like, in any countries that you've been in touch with about regulation actually pushing for bigger automation of workplaces for certain companies, or at least supporting
I would say,
things?
yeah. I would say it's not yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is not coming because think about for a lot of like a lot of the Asian countries have more or less come through. Even though like I'm seeing sort of like this, there are more cases showing up in Hong Kong now. It seems like there's also another outbreak again in like China again, right? Like so there's just like there's some weird stuff that's happening. But I wouldn't be surprised if this stuff comes and goes again. Like the expectation, like the flu, that there might be another big wave like in Q3, Q4 again, right? Like if we get a handle of it in the summer, there might be another big wave that comes through again. Like if that happens, like yeah, there absolutely is going to be a big drive for this. And I also think that the U.S. companies traditionally during recessions, you see mass adoption of technology during recessions because the biggest cost structure of most companies is people. The U.S. tends to be a little bit more ruthless about sort of like shareholder value versus sort of like employees. And so you saw mass adoption of technology in 2008, 2009. I expect that will also accelerate this year.
Yeah, as we're on that subject, and I'd like to shift gears a bit here because we're starting to get first questions from our audience, which is great. That's always good that we're able to basically talk to you guys directly. So there's an interesting question. I like it actually. Someone is asking, so do you think it's a better time now for the startups that are kind of efficient and close to their break even rather than the, basically startups that have been backed up by the big investment, in the different markets, but have basically a burning hole in a kind of a whatever runway that they do have with that cash. So do you think those startups that are closer to break even will now, it's their time to shine?
Yeah, absolutely, right? I think any company that's either profitable or break even, like you already saw that already. Like this wasn't widely sort of like, it wasn't widely reported, but starting in Q4, Q1 of this year, there's already a push by investors, just especially after SoftBank blew up. There's already a push by many investors to drive their companies toward like get to break even now. Don't worry about like high growth versus sort of like now it's actually about being capital efficient, figuring out your unit economics, and getting to break even, because like that gives you almost infinite runway, right? And so that's actually that's already started in Q4 of last year.
So, but if I was an investor, that's the company I would be looking for at the moment, or would I try to grab the guys that actually have a hole in the budget, but for a much better valuation and help them flow?
I mean, it depends, right? I think it really depends on the space. I think it really depends on the hole that you're what you're filling what the hole and how strategic it is to sort of like your initiative. Because sometimes buying like like you're going to get a better deal, right? Obviously, because if the company's break even, they have a lot more bargaining power versus sort of like the company that is like nowhere close to sort of like some level of break even, let alone profitability. Like you will be able to dictate price, right? As long as like the price is somewhat reasonable, and you're not a total dick about it. Like, I think like as long as it's somewhat reasonable and it's strategic to your business, you can probably get pretty good deals now. Like I've seen valuation drops of like 40 to 50%.
Already in the valley.
Yeah, for sure.
That's in the span of 1 month, 40 to 50%.
Yeah, right. Because like there's no clarity and certainty about any downstream capital anymore, right? Because a lot of investors are not going to be like, it doesn't matter what people are saying on VC Twitter or on the news. Like a lot of like you have to, most VCs right now, most major investors are having to deal with their present portfolio right now. You're not going to be investing in new companies. But if you are, they typically are companies that are already doing very well to begin with.
So if I, for me, as an investor, for GVA, for example, as an investor, or for a big corporation as an investor, basically now is the time to make a run for the market and actually scout, right? You're saying like,
now is a great time. Yeah, this is a great time to be going after the market, right? Like, I saw this, somebody mentioned like, telemedicine, absolutely, right? Like I was, like telemedicine has made very little inroads. Like even the US was like very limited inroads. It's skyrocketed. Their business is like I've invested in a bunch of them. It's just last 3-4 weeks have been like incredible for them.
And it's interesting because there's been all sorts of problems with passing the telemedicine laws in Russia, and it's been kind of dragging on and on and on, with the legislation not being way far from perfect. But now government is making a very hard push to get it on and over with, literally within like a few weeks' time. So you guys.
I mean, if you look at healthcare, right? One of the big changes. So, for example, like in the U.S., like doctors can only practice. Say, for example, you're a doctor in California, you can actually only practice in California. That's gone now. So actually, that law has been lifted where doctors can practice in any state now. That's huge, right? That increases competition.
And you think maybe we should wait another month to make that run, or you think we should scout anyway because some other guys might get into the market and scout them before we do?
I think that there are a lot of companies, both offline and online right now, like even corporations in general. So like I said, I want to reiterate, right? Like this is an economic crisis driven by a health crisis. This wasn't an economic crisis, right? Like alone. Right. And so there's some weird dynamics because if you look at a lot of corporations, like even prior to the health crisis, like a lot of them were sitting on a lot of capital, right? Like, and actually a lot of their businesses were actually quite, overall, were generally speaking, look at a lot of the Fortune 500 companies in general across the globe, a lot of them were actually pretty healthy. Yes, they had a lot of like debt, like corporate debt, but also they're also sitting on a lot of cash, and the sort of revenues were on an upswing. So, my expectation prior to sort of like, the coronavirus stuff happening, like you talked to me in January, even early February, like 2020 looked very good, right? I don't think 2020 looks good anymore, but 2020 overall looked very, very good when you looked at just like the macro trends, when you looked at actual health of a lot of these businesses, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, no, I had the same feeling. I think it looked good for almost everyone I've spoken to. and now we're like completely transforming. So we talked about a few areas, obviously the e-commerce, the cloud, the telemedicine. What about more like hardware or things like data centers? I imagine Zoom is buying out anything they can get their hands on right now.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Is it time to basically go into the data centers, or something else? Maybe some other technologies that you've seen, like good cases in your portfolio or other guys' portfolio that are it's time to shine outside of the ones we talked about.
So I was just talking to one of my founders, company called Aircall, and they're doing super well, right? So what they do is their call center in the cloud, right? So a lot of the sort of like phone infrastructure, but like in the cloud, right? Which is a lot of telcos don't have. Their business, like these guys are crushing it. Like their business is actually just really accelerated. Sales cycles have gone down. Overall, they're like doing super well. Aircall, right? Like aircall.io.
Aircall.io. Okay.
Yeah. So they're out of New York and Paris, and they're doing well, right? Like obviously with the exception of the travel folks, but almost every other industry, just like all of a sudden they're getting sort of like rings, phone calls like off the hook, right? Because it's just like, wait a minute, like this is actually a massive cost savings instead of sort of the old infrastructure that they had.
So and those calls are coming from who? The just almost anyone, or mainly big companies that want their service?
Big companies, yeah, like actually mainly big companies, it seems.
Okay. So in that regard, do you see that there's a shift in terms of like the big corporations of their interest in terms of how they work with the startups now? I mean, yes, we've seen that there's like some events continued virtually, like some accelerators, etc. But in general, do you see a lot of corporations on your side of the world basically saying, "Hey, this is the right time. We should go after it"?
I mean, there are a few, right? But I would say majority of them are still kind of in the wait and see, right?
Mm.
Like the anecdotal stuff I'm getting from my companies of like actually the big companies like if you looked at 2008 2009, what was happening is for a lot of them were like they pulled back. Like for example, even accounts receivables were like, hey, I know we owe you money in 30 days. Like we're going to pay you in 150 days now, and good luck, right? Good luck suing us. Like sorry, this is the way it is. That hasn't happened yet. That actually has not happened yet. And you're actually like deals are actually being done still. Like corporates are still spending money because a lot of these are cost savings. So it actually does kind of make sense. A lot of decision makers were, so for example, a lot of my startups are still having conversations where like, hey, if you're willing to sort of like prepay for the next year, we'll give you 25% off. A lot of decision makers are, okay, that's a good deal. I'll do that, right? Like deals are still being done. That has been surprising to me. Like from some companies, right? From some big companies in general. That has actually been surprising to me.
But that's a good sign. That actually supports what you're saying. That some companies are seeing the opportunity and they're not afraid to go after it, even though there's, as long as they understand there's cash in the pockets.
Yeah. Like I said, I would say anecdotally, it seems like that's still happening. And of course, right? Like we're not talking about the airlines, right? They're all in trouble. That's not happening with the airlines, right?
Orca,
yeah. I haven't really seen the pullback yet happen from like automotive factories, for automotive yet. So just in general, it seems like a lot of folks, it's only, we're only like 4 weeks in, right? So a lot of it's still kind of like, we'll wait and see, but like things are slowed down from like if you were in process before, like if you didn't have a relationship with these folks before, like people are still picking up the phone where like, hey, I want to learn, but I don't think any deals are being done. Like this is like what I'm seeing is that you had a relationship with these people already, right? Like you've known them for a while, you've been selling to them for the last 6 months. Like those deals surprisingly seem to be, some of them actually still are getting done, especially if they're related to cost savings.
Okay, so the cost savings are the good deals. We're seeing them. So once again, switching gears a bit, I'm looking at a question here, and it's kind of one of those questions which I've been hearing about, and it raises a lot of also ethical issues. So there are COVID diagnostic startups that are coming up like mushrooms after the rain. Like everyone wants to diagnose, recommend, do something with the COVID. And then some companies and some startups are doing it for free, and some are actually trying to make money on it. Now, do you think there are investors that might be interested in something like that? And in general, is this like an ethical time to even go after trying to get a startup that basically makes profit on the situation?
I think we should, right? I mean, as long as it's not egregious profit, a company needs to survive, right? So I don't know if it's an unethical thing. Like there's a demand for that. There's lots of research, there's lots of government grants, there's lots of money and interest in general for it. And it is like, it's crucial that we get this sorted out, right? Like, for example, whether it's a COVID diagnostic or, for example, their life science companies, I think there's a need for it, right? The sooner we can actually fix this, the sooner we can hopefully get back to some semblance of normality and get on with sort of like moving back to sort of like economic feasibility, right? Right now, it is, I don't know any country that's like economically feasible right now, right? Like we've seen a complete stalling of, and this is going to cause way more pain, right? Like, unemployment, suicide, like survival, right? Like I'm concerned. I'm definitely concerned. Breakdown of law and order. Like this is an extinction event.
Well, hopefully we'll not get to breakdown of law and order, because that would be, almost like one of the zombie movies.
Yeah, but if your unemployment hits like 25 to 30%, I don't see how it can't get there, right?
Well, I hope that's not going to be a scenario for U.S. or Russia, for that matter. But I do see some interesting things happening in the food industry personally, because I think this is the biggest transformation of the food industry, of all the transformations, even over prolonged periods of time, that we've seen in the last maybe 20, 30 years. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're basically like shifting to completely like delivery model. Are there more interesting things to come you're expecting from the food industry?
I mean, unfortunately, I think the food industry is going to be decimated, right? Like, so one number I saw was that something like, at least I can speak about the U.S., is they're expecting 75% of restaurants to disappear, right? Like to not
U.S.
Yeah. Like, and so unfortunately, if you think about the restaurants that are actually going to survive, for better or for worse, I think it's for worse. I think a lot of diversity of restaurants is really important. And if the only restaurants that come back are like chain stores, I don't think that's a good thing. You are seeing like the food deliveries. So what's happening is a lot of the restaurants are having to sort of adapt to sort of like either becoming cloud kitchens, right? Just going all delivery only, right? But that does change a lot of the experience, right? Because if you think about sort of like, it is a restaurant experience. It is an experience going there, having dinner with somebody, like that changes. And I think that is going to have, I'm just talking from a macro perspective, the death of restaurants has huge impact on cities and urban like real estate, right? Like all of a sudden, if we go to a society of just like delivery only, that wrecks Main Street, sort of real estate. And because of just how if you think about the secondary and third effects, there's massive sort of secondary and third tier effects that is going to have on the stock market, right? Because a lot of these are, at least in the U.S. and Europe, a lot of this real estate is actually owned by REITs, right? So it's like real estate investment trusts. Like that is going to change. That's going to change like the face of a lot of like downtown, change a lot of like urban centers. So I don't know, like it changes everything. So yes, restaurants who can adapt to sort of delivery only will probably do well, right? And you see a lot of some of the fastest growing companies. There's like World Kitchen. Have you heard of this company? Like one of the fastest growing companies. Like they're going to be very well positioned, but that does change a lot of sort of how cities are actually structured.
So which pulls us into almost like the next question is, so not only the restaurants, obviously the stores located on these main streets will experience the same. Yes, they're closed.
Yeah, for sure.
And if they're not big retail, well, in fact, all big retail brands are closed as well. So all will suffer, which will pull us into a real estate mini crisis, which
Correct.
Real estate pulls down the markets. So you're saying that we're basically in for a good downward spiral because of that.
Yeah, because I think about this way, right? Like you think about secondary effects and third tier effects and fourth tier effects, or and I'm just not to paint like a horrible picture, but it is a horrible picture. But forewarned is forearmed, right? We want to think about this. So you go sit there and go, okay, all these retail workers, or sort of like sort of restaurant workers, like they're getting unemployment. It's not enough to cover their rent, right? So for example, even in New York now, like April and May is going to be very, very scary because they estimate in New York 25% of many of these workers can't pay their rents, right? So are they going to get booted out? How does their landlord pay like their mortgages? There's all these effects afterwards, right? If the landlord cannot pay their mortgage, then they're going to renege on sort of paying their mortgage. The banks start having more issues with their loan books. They're going to stop sort of like loaning out money. Like there's all these like really, really bad effects that actually come out of this, right? And so that is what I'm worried about.
Yeah, so and it seems like, okay, well, on an individual level, it seems like we're screwed, because we'll inevitably, being part of the society, going to experience all of these after effects and aftershocks on us. From the business perspective, we're also not in such a good shape. So, basically, the companies that do have cash and can implement it now will somehow, well, can at least bridge that gap and maybe come out on the other side unscathed, or at least not damaged as heavily, and maybe become the beacons of those around which the new business or the new activity will congregate and hopefully drive us forward. What do you think? Maybe it's some VCs who are sitting on cash, because I know of the funds that are still being fundraised. They're still basically moving forward, and they plan to close by early summer, etc. So the investment activity haven't stopped in terms of fundraising completely. And if there are investors that are sitting on cash, can they deploy this cash somehow effectively to actually make good for themselves and maybe the world around them?
So there's a couple questions there, right? I think that from VC perspective, like if you're a VC that's been around for a while, you're triaging your old portfolio. You're not doing new investments. You're going to sit and watch and wait to sort of see how things are. So you're not going to be doing a new deal at earliest September, right? Because here's the thing: as dark as a picture I actually paint, where at least if you know how good it is, like how fast we're going to either move back or have some view of that, or how bad it could get, at least you can plan around that, right? Right now, it's not very clear, right? At least I think, at least in the public eye, and for a lot of people, like it's not very clear, and so that's one of the challenges. That uncertainty, we don't deal well with uncertainty overall, and that uncertainty is killing investment. So you're better off sitting and waiting, right? As an investor, I also think the biggest thing with the VC is that besides working on your present portfolio and fixing stuff, you're also sort of like you're also concerned of whether your LPs are actually able to give them money either, right? So a lot of LPs are endowments, foundations, etc. Like a lot of their wealth was also in family offices. A lot of their wealth was actually in stock market. Stock market's up and down all the time. Like I have VC friends who are like not going to call capital because they don't know if their LPs are able to give them money. So I don't think that like this is different versus say a VC that is already just called capital and it just doesn't have a portfolio to manage. 2020 is going to be a great time to invest. There's going to be some interesting companies that are come out of 2020, 2021 for sure, right? So anyone who's investing right now, you're going to get some really good deals. Like that's the reality. Valuations have gone down. You're going to see some really, really good companies on the market. Anyone who's starting a company now is either crazy or actually like in really good shape. Like they're really dealing on a real problem of need. They're probably going to do all right. So I think that it's a great time to invest in general if you have the capital.
But here's a question, and then you have a kind of a moral dilemma. So let's say you have a present portfolio, right? And like you're saying, that portfolio, obviously, some of it will need triaging because it's hit by the crisis. And then you have the ability to go invest into something new. So basically, it's partially a moral dilemma, but should you be really saving the lives of startups that you love and already have a stake in, but that are seemingly going down and you don't really have a forecast of whether they will survive or not? I mean, maybe it's a hard decision, but maybe you should just let them go then instead of triaging. Or is it more difficult?
Yeah, that's tough, right? Because I think that at the end of the day, so for example, like if you're in the travel space, like that's a hard one, right? Like and there's no clear bridge because I think the travel thing is going to take at least 2 to 3 years to recover. And so you have to decide like, okay, if I give you an extra $1 million or $2 million, is that really going to help at all, right? Or am I just throwing good money after bad? You have to make some very, very hard decisions versus this other company for example, this other company that's in the shipping area, company called Shippo, they're super good, right? So I'm like, yes, I would absolutely and they're well-run companies, so like they're in great shape. So like it's just one of those things where it's like you just got to figure out what makes sense, and unfortunately you can't help everybody, and so you have to make some very, very hard decisions at this time.
Yeah, and also actually that kind of rings true for people that do and build and run accelerators. I mean, you've been a partner of 500. We run multiple accelerators, so it's a very interesting time and question for us. Okay, so what do we do? Do we really focus? And we actually discussed this. We're looking to potentially launch a new accelerator in LA. You know about it. I told you.
Yeah.
And a big question came up. Okay, well, now this thing hit, we were planning to focus on certain industries that will grow. We know they will grow during the crisis and after, without
like media. Yeah, like media, right? Media is going to be well positioned, right? So I think like I was thinking about this. Where if you look at like the big five, right? Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, right? The reality, Microsoft, they're in great shape. Amazon, they're in great shape. I think Facebook and Google will be very challenged because they're ad driven, right? So this is one of the first, this is one of those weird times where you're going to see media sort of like usage in general, right, and consumption is going to be highest than it ever has been.
Right.
But I think you're going to see like the ad dollars are not going to be there, right, or the ad rubles are not going to be there. So it's going to be a weird dichotomy of like massive usage and adoption, very little sort of like very very little sort of like ad dollars, but that will come back, right? Like that will always come back in the long run, probably 1 or 2 years from now. So they'll be fine. And both Google and Facebook are sitting on a lot of cash, right? Like tens of billions of dollars. They're going to be all right. And when the market does come back, they'll be the ones who'll be around, and they will get disproportionate amount of, like they already own 75%. Like for example, Facebook and Google already take 75% of all the money out there in digital spend, right? When the market comes back, it's going to be probably 85, 90.
Probably. But what I was actually getting at, so we were looking at these three areas, and edutainment, education as well, which will benefit also. They will grow digitally. But also there is a question of, well, maybe we should go out and help the companies that are in need and do have a chance of survival by pivoting, by making some changes internally, organizationally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or finding new clients. And it's an interesting question for all accelerator builders, which a lot of accelerator builders are driven by basically just funds and the benefit of the fund that's tied to the accelerator. But now we're actually looking at almost a new model where, okay, are we building these, or can we build programs that will help a number of companies survive and or help bigger players survive through working with the smaller companies?
I mean, I actually think that as long as that the big company is very, very clear about sort of like the areas that they're focusing on and the areas of improvement, and there's close tie-in between sort of like the stuff that's actually happening at Acceler with the mainline businesses and senior management, I think it's a good use of time and resources. If it's not, and it's just sort of like a PR and CSR exercise, and that's a waste of time, right? So I do think like as long as it's taken very seriously and a lot of these innovations are actually pulled into sort of the main business, then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But remember, a lot of them are not, right? A lot of accelerators are done as like CSR projects, right, and PR projects.
Yeah, no, I think it's more true for the American market than Russian market, because in Russia it's a bit more practical. The companies actually want to see results. So in that regard, I guess it might work out better for the companies that are basically doing these programs in Russia. We have another question, which I like this one. It's actually, okay, so education system changes and psychological services, some Uber for psychologists and coaches.
Yeah, that's a huge space in the U.S. And I think you're going to see. I mean, it's hard to say sort of how well they're going to do because like they're in the U.S. alone, there's like 20 of them, right? I invest in like 3 of them already, right? And so just like it's one of those things where like there's definitely a need.
Startups or psychological?
Or psychological, for like coaches, psychologists. That business seems to be on a tear, right? Like especially now, you're seeing acceleration, digitalization, right? Like that was doing well. That business was doing well already. But number one, I think with this crisis, you're going to see some consolidation in the space. So there'll be much clearer offerings, I think, for customers. But in general, I do think like that is a long-term trend, right? That's going to happen.
So, but where are we channeling these services? I mean, for example, I know a Russian startup called Poнимaya, which was servicing big corporate clients in their offices by a kind of a part-time staff psychologist or a distant psychologist, right? So now that those people have been moved offline, so basically we're servicing them offline to adapt to the new reality, or is that how we're using these services mainly now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I think that there's a company called Torch, which is about like coaches, right, for executives and sort of like working staff, and the reality is that just because you do it face to face, you can still do it online. Face to face is always better, but now because of the new circumstances, like it's not that hard to go and do this over like a Zoom call, just because you have to do it now. And everything I said before, just like if this lockdown keeps on continuing, which I anticipate at least for another month or so, it will continue. These are what habits are like. You just kind of get used to it. You're like, and you realize there are benefits of being virtual sometimes, right? You're not wasting time on a commute. And then what you do is just like in the long run, what might end up happening, you just end up meeting with people like maybe once every week or once every month or something like that. Most of the time you're doing it virtually. So this is a massive, massive human behavioral change, like globally, right? Like in the professional sort of like area, like this is a huge change and it's here, whether you like it or not. And so this is going to change how we interact with everybody, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful time for these types of companies to actually go and actually in two ways, both help a lot of people and make a lot of money in the process.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and at least that part is exciting. So let me ask. I mean, I can't resist asking the question: how's 500 gonna adapt? Well, you know 500 in and out because you've been there. But what do you think? 500 Y Combinator plug and plays. Do you think they'll be able to shift fully digital now that we're in this space, or is it the fabric of accelerator doesn't allow that?
I don't know. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's unclear, right? Like I do think it is possible. That means that you have to sort of like, I'm not at 500 anymore, right? So I don't have any visibility into sort of like what they're doing. But what I definitely say is that I think that you have to sort of like rebuild everything from scratch. And so it is doable. It's hard, but it is doable. And so, and I think because of the forcing function of the coronavirus, it's that you kind of just have to go and figure it out. Like it's an existential thing. So you kind of just got to do it, right? And so I think they're going to be able to figure it out. There are a lot of smart people at all these organizations. Like they will figure it out.
Yeah, well, hopefully, because we've seen, we've seen some of the models that have already crumbled on the Russian market, but that just can't, go online quickly enough. And even though I have to share with you, we have an experience where we had to quickly switch gears with one of our running programs, and it's a challenge. It's not a challenge as much for us because we can reshuffle, but it's more of a challenge for the people that are in the program because we're demanding a lot of things from them. At the same time, they're saying, well, there's coronavirus, we're limited, and they have to be twice as creative. And how they go, to their customers, how they switch to the business models, etc. So it's almost like you're facing a whole different set of questions from the startups in this age.
Yeah, it's like how do you run like a fully virtual remote business? But I do think that there are test cases for this of just like what you used to have to do sort of face to face. Now you have to leverage sort of a lot more of like the consumer type marketing and customer acquisition type strategies. And that's an adjustment, but it is doable. There are models for that you can actually go and like, take learnings from to sort of adapt for your business. And so I do think it is possible. And also just to, what I tell folks, like, look, at the end of the day, like whether you're individual, big company, startup, you just got to survive, right? Like at this point in time, you just got to survive and hopefully thrive, right? Like first, but before you thrive, you kind of have to survive first. So as long as you survive this year, you're going to be all right.
But you're saying survive by not being passive, but rather being aggressive and actually taking steps into changing.
Yeah, exactly. You don't sit. Yeah, like nobody wins by just sitting there doing nothing and hoping somebody, the government or someone comes to rescue you, right? Like no, you
be quite often a story in Russia, unfortunately, that happened before. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and I just think like I just think you got to take an active role in sort of like be an agent, right? Like sort of like you just got to go and take control of your own sort of like here's the way I think about it, right? Insanity is like doing sort of like expecting people to do other stuff for you, right? Like and trying to control things you have no control. You have no control of coronavirus. You have no control over sort of other people's reactions to it. You have no control over your customer screwing you on accounts receivables. But what you can control is your own psychology. You can control how you manage like and have a plan, right? Like what's your plan to go and like mitigate a lot of these things? What are your plans to sort of start talking to your customers right now, right? Like take better care of them. What are the things that you can actually do to sort of manage around that? And that's all you can do, right? And so that's something I've done personally where I'm just like, this is crazy what's going on there. And you read all the news and it makes you be very, very sad. But then you kind of got to get past that and figure out like, all right, like what are the things how do I manage my team better? what are the things I can actually do right now to sort of manage around this tragedy and this crisis, right? And have very clear action steps and focus on the process of that, right? And kind of ignore the rest of it.
And that also brings up a question of basically, do we fight it alone, or do we actually somehow really unite to fight it jointly? And I see a dichotomy happening. There are certainly war profiteers, and some of them are not like bad war profiteers. They just happen to be in the right space at the right time, and they're feeling amazing, hiring thousands of people. And then there are people that are suffering, but it's a question of do I sacrifice a bit? Do I basically, as an example, a very simple example, not from the digital space, as a landlord, let's say I have a building and I have, 40 tenants, and half of them are startups and another quarter are small business and other big companies that have cash. So I know they will clear out very quickly. Within the next weeks, I'll start seeing them fall out. So do I allow them? Do I cut them some slack, and do we basically lower down the rent? And then I'll have problems with my mortgage, but at the same time, maybe I'll negotiate with the other guys. And basically, do we build that bridge on all sides, or do we try and squeeze and run as fast as we can? Because it's a dilemma I'm seeing all over the place, and I'm seeing people act differently in these situations.
Yeah, I mean, my take is I always think it's always better to try to work it out, right? Because I think that I'm very, very convinced that if you treat people badly as an employee, your partners, your customers during this time, when things come back, everybody knows you are and especially in this day and age of social media and deep networks of just companies that treat their employees and treat their partners or whatever very poorly and very bad during this time, your business and your brand is toast. And brand actually really matters. Brands and people who actually do a good job actually managing around that, and at least so for example, cutting some slack, trying to have some arrangement in general, try to make it work. You will have a good reputation, when you come out of this, and that helps a lot. And you will probably see a disproportionate amount of the business actually come back to you, right? And so these things matter. I think that anyone who takes these very, very short-sighted things of just screwing folks, being bad to employees during this time, or as an investor treating sort of founders really badly during this time, we all know that happened in 2008, 2009. A lot of bad players were wiped out, right? That happened in 2000, 2001. A lot of bad players were wiped out. That is definitely going to be the case here, especially because it's a health crisis.
So it's bad players being wiped out, so it's cleansing in a way.
Yeah, cleansing. But at the same time, I just think we're all in this together, right? Whatever the politicians say, as people, we're all in this together, right? Screw the politicians. It's we're all fighting this thing together, and you got to help each other out. And now's the time we are all facing challenges. So now's the time to be kind to each other and try to cut people slack, right? And try to be helpful to other people. And by the way, this is a selfish thing. It will come back to you, right? You treat people badly, it will come back to you. You treat people well, it will come back to you. That. I've been through 4 recessions.
Yeah. So I think all of us have at this point, and in Russia even maybe 5. We're hit more often. So to wrap this up, we've got a few more minutes left. More on a personal note, I see you're there, comfortable in the comfort of your home, and hopefully you and your family are safe. But what has changed for you, financially, in terms of how you invest, or what your modus operandi for everyday work? Maybe some anecdotes you could share with us, and maybe some hacks also, some cool things that you found out that work.
I think with crises, it's just and this is literally the advice I give my companies, right? I spent the last 4 weeks just spending a lot of time talking to my old portfolio companies at 500 and stuff, and most of them are in crisis mode right now. Some are in very good shape, but most of them are in crisis mode right now. And so what I'm telling you is look, you got to have a plan, right? So first of all, you got to cut all non-essential things, and you're going to do it. Be thoughtful about it, really, really thoughtful. You got to reforecast, things personally, whether personally or whatever, where it's what you thought was going to happen probably is not going to happen anymore. So how do you reforecast down to sort of 80%, right? And also don't be afraid of mourning. Being sad and mourning, and I have been for the last week, of just that old world that we knew of how we do business and things that's gone, right? And so the only week I can actually move on is actually mourning. So I'm kind of in my week of like mourning right now, where just like just feel sad, right? I feel sad about like it's going to be a long time. So for example, as a global traveler, we used to travel all the time, right? That world's gone.
I feel you. You know, I traveled all the time too.
Yeah, like that world's gone, right? Like, and if we do travel, you're gonna be in quarantine for 2 weeks in places, at least until we get a handle of it. So, you know, I've been mourning about that world, right? Like that's been my life for the last like over 20 years, right? Like just travel. Like I was executive at Yahoo for international, you know, at 500 and other things. I was traveling like every 2 weeks, and now that world is gone, right? And that was originally my plan for this year, just like doing investing, other things, and that world's gone now. So it's just like you got to be okay with mourning and have a plan, hopefully a good plan for the rest of this year, and actually be okay that this plan may not be what you thought it was going to be. But the most important thing is actually surviving and making sure your family and your friends and your neighbors are in good shape, right? Meditation, having a gym routine, going for walks outside, like all
the gym routine is especially tough now because we can't go out of the building. So
but the thing is, you can use a floor, right? Do push-ups, sit-ups, and things like that. So I do a lot of meditation. And I try not to overthink stuff, because I think like at the day, I really try to take it day by day, right? Like I have a plan, I'm executing every day. There's certain things I just do, like just like as a process, right? For myself, I just do, and I just have to trust in the process, and I don't overthink, because if you think like, oh my God, like 3 months from now or 4 months from now, like, this is going to happen, like we don't know. And so that isn't helpful. That just drives anxiety and stress, which actually reduces your immune system, which is actually not good in this environment. So try not to overthink stuff, right? And meditate, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and try to be kind to other people and try to help other people where you can, right?
So what are you doing to just help, like just basically literally help? Like
I mean, I'm literally reaching out to like, you know, my extroverted friends. I'm reaching out to like, I'm trying to have regular calls with like friends, family, my portfolio companies, investor friends. Everybody's suffering, right? Like the reality, even if you're saving a lot of cash, like it is not just a cash thing. Like I have friends who have coronavirus, right? Like they're suffering. I have friends who have family pass away, right? Like one of my portfolio companies, like his mom died of coronavirus, right? So like it's like we're all going through some like a really traumatic time, and I think Russia's a couple weeks behind, right? But like
about maybe 3. Well, depends. We're in a lockdown. We'll see how well that works. But,
I mean, lockdowns work, right? California went to lockdown 4 weeks ago. If you look at our cases versus say New York, it is dramatically different.
Better,
yeah, significant, and even without the testing or whatever. But just the reality of deaths, like you can count, you just look at the number of deaths. Like it's huge difference. There's a dramatic difference, right? And San Francisco also has like we went to lockdown earlier, but also we're not as dense, right? And we had a lot more people pay attention to sort of like really pay attention to the lockdown. So like it does work, but I do worry about the financial sort of like the economic and the financial impact that a lockdown actually has, right? And that is going to be very significant. It's going to be very, very significant. A lot of people are anticipating a very good year this year. That shock alone is also, like that is going to be very hard for a lot of people to recover from too.
Yeah. Well, is there anything we can tell you, from our side? Maybe you want to ask a question for them. You want me to ask
This is your time. I'm here to be helpful to you all, right?
Yeah. No, but I think you really thank you for the time. It's you shared a lot of information and a lot of views. And I think one of the most for me personally, one of the most impactful views from which I'm still reeling is that I knew it wasn't going to be a different world, but maybe I didn't want to really admit it until this call. That's my kind of biggest insight, because now that we're talking it out for an hour back and forth, I'm really beginning to think through really deeply a lot of these things, and it's true. Well, it's never going to be like the new normal is not just a phrase. It will be new.
I'll be I'm glad I'm able to do these calls and talk to my companies and things, because it actually helping other people actually makes you feel good. Like it's a selfish thing, honestly, because I've been this last week. I've been in mourning, right? I've just been in mourning of just like coming to the realization, just like I've had like four of my favorite restaurants have shut down. Like they're not coming back. Right. So, and I think about the suffering that they have, and this is a tragedy. This is a huge human tragedy for me, like just for everybody. And so this world, it's like we are entering a brand new world. And so that to me, it's just like, and you should be okay with mourning, right? Like that's the only way you're gonna be able to sort of like adapt to this new world, right? Like you can't hold on to this. And so that's the thing with any human change, right? In a corporate, right? Like the biggest challenge of just sort of change management in a corporate too is just like letting go of sort of like the old ways you do stuff and hopefully accepting sort of the new way. And that's, we all have to go through that. Like we are going through that now.
We're forced now. Everyone in the corporate is forced to go through this. There's no choice. Like it's almost like just an inevitable process, and you might just survive it better and you kind of go through it better, or you might go through it in extreme pain and suffering. I guess that's the only difference, right?
I think, yeah, like I don't like it, but it's just like we have to just accept it now, right? And it sucks, but the sooner we accept it, the sooner we can move on and actually be much more proactive and hopefully optimistic, right? Like we will get through this, right? Like I'm very confident in the human race and our ingenuity, our hard work, and there's so many people working on this. So like we will get through this, but it's going to be really painful. And that, like I said, that old world that we lived in is gone. And we have to be okay saying goodbye to it. And the sooner we say goodbye to it, the sooner we can move into the new world. So yeah.
I think I'll go open a bottle of red wine and say goodbye to my world. So
that's what I'm going to be doing. I day drink. It's okay.
Well, for us it's evening, so it's okay.
Yeah.
It's evening drink. Well, anyway, hey man, thanks a lot. Thanks for being there, just sharing with us. I think it makes me feel better too, because I'm also in mourning now, but I know you're in mourning, so we're all kind of getting through this. And thanks for the good insights. Let's stay in touch, and hopefully we'll see you again. And there's going to be more virtual conferences, so you don't have to.
You know where to find me. Yeah, you know where to find me. I mean, just I wish everyone good luck and just like hang in there, but just have a plan, right? Like have a plan, hang in there, and don't overthink stuff, right? But just like this is an opportunity. You have to choose. You have to decide whether it's going to be, like is it going to be a crisis? You're going to sit here and wait and be a passive, or I actually think like take this as like my recommendation is like take some action.
Yeah, it's going to be a busy year. All right. Well, we'll see you soon, and thanks for everyone who was with us today. I don't know, Natalia will give